Before you get comfortable, I want to draw your attention to the last video I posted, which was a reading of the love song of J. Alfred Prufrock, a poem by T.S. Eliot. I scripted this video under the assumption that you've already watched that video or at least read the poem yourself, and you can definitely get through this without it, but I do reference Prufrock a lot, and since I already have a whole video talking about who he is, I don't introduce him or explain anything about him here. So if you want to get the most out of this, I definitely suggest that you pause here, go back, watch that video, or read the poem for yourself. Both of those links are in the description for you. And with that aside, let's get into the video. Hi, I'm Moon, and welcome back to Analysis 101. If this is your first time seeing me, welcome. Thanks for joining us. You'll notice that this is part 3 in a series, and while you don't have to watch the other parts before you get to this one, if you're brand new to literary analysis, I really would suggest that you go back and check those out first. I am holding my microphone today because it's old and not connecting to the stand that it usually goes on, and I've given up. We're going for like a podcaster look today. Podcasters don't hold their microphones. First off, I am so sorry for taking a million years to upload this post. I promise that I haven't been slacking and I haven't lost interest. I do have a very good reason for my YouTube radio silence, actually. It's a fun little thing called Graves' disease, which I was diagnosed with in June of last year when I went to the ER with a resting heart rate of 140. And look, the name makes it sound a lot scarier than it is. It's not terminal. I'm not gonna die. It's called Graves' disease because the guy who discovered it was called Graves, which is like the coolest name ever. But while it won't kill me, it has made my life unlivable for the past 6 months, and the 6 months before that I spent just trying to wrap my head around the fact of this new chronic illness that I have. It has made writing a script and filming a little bit difficult. You'll notice that I filmed this over a couple of days rather than all in one go, which is what I normally do. But things are finally looking up because in 4 days I'm getting my thyroid removed, which is like flicking a switch, I've been told. I'm just going to be able to go back to normal as soon as I'm recovered from the surgery, which is kind of crazy because honestly I don't really know what normal is anymore. But yeah, chances are that I'm going to be editing this while I recover from the surgery, so this will be up by the time it's already done. Here's a photo for proof of life, and hopefully if everything goes to plan, I'm going to be back to regularly uploading again. I know that's something that I've promised over and over, but I really do actually mean it this time. So yeah, that's what's been happening in my life. Let's just start talking analysis because that's the entire reason that you're here. Today we're going to cover 2 topics that just so happen to be my favourite within this subject: annotation and character analysis. A lot of you have followed me here from TikTok, where I pretty much only talk about character analysis, so when I say I can yap about this for hours on end, I have physical proof that I am capable of doing that, but we're just going to go over the basics today. So grab a study snack and a notebook if that's your thing, and let's get into it. As with all aspects of literary analysis, it's important to ask ourselves why. Why are characters, specifically, so interesting, and what can they tell us about a story that other aspects cannot? It's important to note that every story can be put into one of 3 boxes. You have character-driven stories, where major developments are driven entirely by the decisions of the characters. Plot-driven stories, where it doesn't matter how much autonomy the characters have, they don't seem to be able to enforce any real change. And stories that are a mix of both. Some great examples of character-driven stories include How to Train Your Dragon, Haikyuu, and She Who Became the Sun. Some good examples of plot-driven stories include Cars, Slaughterhouse-5, and The Last of Us. And on this, I do want to say that a lot of video games utilize plot-driven stories because they want to move you in a specific direction, regardless of what decisions you as a player can make throughout the game. And some great stories that are plot and character-driven include Yellow Jackets, Orange, and Kaiju Number 8. Plots and characters go hand in hand. Regardless of how they influence each other, these are the driving forces of any story. If a story was an atom, then the plot and characters would be the protons and electrons, and the moral would be the neutron. Now, sometimes stories might start in one box and then shift to another. Supernatural is a great example of this. It's constantly switching between plot-driven and character-driven storytelling. And sometimes authors can trick us into thinking that the story fits into one box only to reveal later that it was actually the other box the whole time. A great example of this is Attack on Titan. We spend practically the entire story convinced that this is character-driven, only to be shown at the very end, like the last, 5 chapters, that it was plot-driven all along. Now consider Prufrock for a moment. Would you argue that his story is plot or character-driven? Honestly, you could argue for either or for both. I personally think that his story is an entirely character-driven one, and let me explain why. We have to remember that the entire story is written from his perspective, which in and of itself is very gloomy and very dark, and he makes it abundantly clear that he believes in fate, or at least in some higher power that has deigned him as someone who will live alone for the rest of his life, and he's kind of resigned himself to this as a fact. He's living in a prison of his own creation, and only seems to be partially aware that he's the reason he's there. This is a literary device called dramatic irony, where the audience is aware of something that a character is not. Shakespeare is a really great author to check out if you want some clear-cut examples of dramatic irony. Anytime a character says something that another character doesn't hear, whether it's an aside, whether they're in a different room or a different part of the world, it doesn't matter. That's dramatic irony, because we as the audience are privy to something that the character is not. But this makes Prufrock an interesting case, because he is the only character that we're dealing with in this entire poem. And what I mean by that is that all of the other people who he mentions throughout the poem don't get a say. They don't talk to us ever. They're presented to us entirely through his perspective. And if you were to read the poem, his love song, and take it entirely at face value, it's obviously a plot-driven story. It's only through the understanding that he is an unreliable narrator that we can see this for what it truly is, a character-driven story. He did this to himself. So already, just by considering how characters affect the plot of their story, we've already learned a lot about the piece that we're analysing. What else can we figure out just by making surface-level observations? To me, there are three obvious things that pop up to the forefront of my mind. First is the genre and the style of the text. There are plenty of ways to figure this out that have nothing to do with characters, of course, but sometimes the characters can be the final piece of the puzzle. Take, for example, K-pop Demon Hunters, which I highly recommend you check out, especially if you're new to Analysis and you want to try something different. This is an action comedy with fantasy elements, but it's also a coming-of-age story. The only reason we can classify it as a coming-of-age story is because of what happens to our characters, namely the main character, Rumi. Second is that characters can give us insight into certain themes within a story. Sometimes a character comes to represent a single theme or idea so strongly that we can track how that theme changes throughout the plot by seeing what happens to the character. And these are sometimes known as symbolic characters, by the way. We see this a lot in mythological stories, folklore, and fables, where the characters are supposed to represent the moral or the central message of the story. And it's also quite common in children's literature. You can see this with the Mr. Men series. It's very obvious what the characters are meant to represent. Other examples that come to mind include Stoic and Hiccup from How to Train Your Dragon, who represent the traditional versus non-traditional way of life. Ashitaka from Princess Mononoke, who becomes a personification of the war between humans and the forest. And Lan Wangji and Wei Wuxian, who at points throughout Modazushi come to represent the clash between ethics of deontology and consequentialism. And finally, characters can give us insight into how the author views real people, including themselves. Remember that everyone, including you and me, has internalized biases that we might not even realize we have until we go to write something about it. Having biases does not make you evil, it does not make you a bad person, it's just the reality of having a pattern-seeking brain. The way that you approach your biases and approach the people who you may be biased against is what matters. One of the most obvious examples out there is H.P. Lovecraft, who was infamous for writing disgusting stereotypes throughout his stories, and these are stereotypes that he wholeheartedly believed in real life. He was a white supremacist and a fascist, and although he did end up turning against Hitler at the end of his life, he wholeheartedly supported him for a very, very long time. That's the kind of person we're talking about. There is a rumour online that the Klan, like with a K, wrote him a letter asking him to stop associating with them because he was so racist that even they couldn't handle it, but that is just an inside joke. That didn't actually happen, although it is something that I could find myself believing. Now, I've included a link in the description to The Shadow over Innsmouth, which is one of his most famous stories, so that you can see for yourself. This is a piece where his views on interracial marriage and emigration really shine through, and not in a good way. Now, many horror fans, including myself, really enjoy Lovecraft's works because he was an excellent writer, and we as readers are capable of looking at stories such as The Shadow over Innsmouth and saying, this is a brilliant work of fiction. I understand what biases are being included here and how they would affect people in real life, and I'm not going to let my biases reflect these. Does that make sense? And anyway, the only reason that I read his work, and that I suggest you do as well, is because he's dead, and he cannot personally gain from us being fans of his work anymore. I would argue that the only time you can truly separate the art from the artist is when the artist is physically incapable of gaining anything from your support, and a dead author is the perfect example of this, so go ham. And let me be super clear, authors should not and do not have to write perfectly ethical, morally good characters all the time. It is actually super important that negative aspects of our lives, such as racism, are allowed to be included within storytelling. There's unfortunately a very common sentiment floating around online right now, especially among younger readers, that if an author is to write a bad character, or you as a reader are to enjoy a bad character, that makes you a bad person. They wholeheartedly believe that if you enjoy these characters, that means that your morals align with theirs. To which I say, conflating your own morality with the morality of someone who isn't even real is a fool's errand. And if we don't allow people to write about certain things, we are silencing the voices of victims. Remember that people write as an outlet. People write because they want to process complex trauma and grief. People write because they want to explore a morally reprehensible idea in a way that isn't going to physically hurt anyone. People write simply because they want to, and people should be allowed to write whatever they want to. And just because you find something morally reprehensible doesn't mean that the next person will. If we ban one thing, it opens the door to banning others. Do you understand where I'm going with this? Like, imagine you're in a boardroom with all these people and you're saying, what should we protect the general public from? What should we ban from storytelling so that we can keep everyone safe? Someone says murder. Okay, cool. Yeah, let's ban people from writing about murder. If you write about murder, you're as bad as a murderer. Right, next, what's another thing? Sexual assault? Yeah, great one, because that's genuinely very terrible and we don't want people reading about that. It's really triggering. Cool. Someone else says sex in general. We shouldn't write about sex. Okay, yeah, sure, I understand how that might be, like, too much, sure. Some guy at the back of the room puts up his hand and he's like, we should ban writing about gay people because they're all gonna burn in hell. Do you understand what I'm saying? This is how we slide down the slippery slope of censorship, which is a dangerous, dangerous thing. If you don't like something, you shouldn't read it, and if it is genuinely concerning you that much, if you think that someone is writing about something and they plan to hurt people, that's when you can start to take action and maybe get the local authorities involved, I don't know. But imagine treating every author who's killed off a character in a book as if they've actually murdered someone. I can't actually do this. Anyway, a vast majority of the time, when authors write about villains, they make them do bad things, so that we as an audience can look at them and say, wow, this guy's evil, I'm gonna root for the other one now. AKA, the negative actions exist to be critiqued, and the author believes that their audience is smart enough to pick up on this. Does that mean that insanely bigoted authors should get away with their representation of oppressed characters within a story? No. But Moon, you say, how do we tell the difference between someone who's critiquing the action and someone who condones it? This is actually incredibly easy to do. Let me show you. All we need to do is figure out what causes a character to end up in a specific situation. Everything that we were saying before about character-driven and plot-driven storytelling, this is a similar line of thinking. If something happens to a character as a result of purposeful world-building, generally it is a critique. But if something happens to a character seemingly for no reason, generally it is not. And I say generally because there are always exceptions, okay, but we're going to go through a couple of examples, and as you practice trying to spot this, it's going to become really easy, I promise. Authors who are critiquing real-world issues tend to work these issues seamlessly into their plot, their world building, their characters, everything. And it just feels really natural. Usually it will appear either as a major theme or just as subtext. Things happen to the characters because of their own actions, the actions of other characters around them, and the systems and social infrastructure of the fictional world. You don't have to condone any of the actions, but you can very easily trace them through the plot and see why they occurred. Look at To Kill a Mockingbird, for example. This is one of the most famous works that actively condemns racism. And the fictional world of To Kill a Mockingbird is modelled exactly after our own, specifically the American Deep South of the 50s and 60s. And the book is riddled with racist language, sexism, upsetting scenes, and the entire plot centers around an allegation of rape. It's not a pretty story, and all of that is more than enough to get Harper Lee cancelled on today's Twitter. The book has been banned from classrooms before, but it's still being taught in schools today because of how powerful its message is, because you as a reader are not supposed to support these negative things, you are supposed to critique them. Compare this to a story where certain characters are treated unfairly by the author. Things just keep happening to them for no apparent reason until you dig a little deeper, and sometimes, let's be real, you don't have to dig at all, and you realise that this is centred in bigotry. Unfortunately, I do have to bring up J.K. Rowling. I'm sorry. Her list of racial crimes against characters is extensive. I'm sure most of you have heard the worst of it, such as Cho Chang, who is the only named East Asian character, and saying she's named is a stretch because she has 2 last names that make absolutely no sense. And of course there's that subservient race of goblins who only exist to do menial tasks like housework, and they go crazy if they don't have work. I wonder where I've heard that before. And what about the only Irish character who is constantly blowing things up? Like, this author is so racist that she's had people online saying that they've learned new forms of bigotry from her. And look, I don't care if you like Harry Potter, okay, I used to love it. I visited Harry Potter World at Universal Japan as recently as 2020, alright? I hadn't thought to critique the writing or the world building or the author herself at the time, and now I have this stupid Ravenclaw scarf that I can never get rid of because it's also the softest, warmest scarf that I own. I understand the nostalgia surrounding Harry Potter, and I don't think it's wrong to look back on it fondly, but it doesn't matter what your personal experience with this franchise is. What matters is that Rowling is a deeply bigoted person who has gained a lot of influence because of this series. It is impossible to totally separate the art from the artist, and this is the perfect example. Not only has Rowling publicly stated that she's taken the funds from Harry Potter and donated them directly to anti-trans organizations, just as an example, but we can't ignore the damage that these stereotypes do to the real world.
Oh, brother, this guy stinks!
For one, the fact that she is so widely published and celebrated tells other people who believe these disgusting things that it's okay, you can get away with treating people like this. But also, once again, a majority of her audience is very young, and when they're presented with the goblin argument, for example, they're far less likely to question where this idea comes from. Oh, these things, because they are viewed as things the same way that black slaves once were, thrive off of work? It would be cruel of me if I did not force them into slavery for the rest of their lives. There is actual evidence throughout the Harry Potter books that supports this claim, and the thing is, there is no reason within the fictional world of Harry Potter for any of these things to exist. You're telling me that wizards who can charm inanimate objects to do housework for them still rely on slave labor? You're telling me that you put so much effort into making this whole discussion about pureblood versus mudblood wizards, which is still problematic, just by the way, only to slide in some sneaky dog whistles of your own that you know are going to go over the heads of your young audience? The real kicker is that a lot of it is just straight up lazy writing, and when you mix it with this clear disdain for minority groups, it creates a rather dangerous combination, especially for young readers to be exposed to.
In the United States, there is a critically acclaimed, widely taught children's book I was forced to read 9 million times, Tiki Tiki Tembo. The first sentence of that book is, there once was a Chinese boy named Tiki Tiki Tembo, no saw Rembo, cherry berry ruchi, pip berry pembo. No, there wasn't. I have a Chinese brother, his name is Kevin. And when this white author was confronted about it, she was like, oh my God, I'm so sorry, I don't speak Chinese. I just wrote down what I heard my neighbor say. So we're gonna do a group experiment where I'm gonna say real Chinese, and then at some point I'm gonna switch to not quite Chinese, but I won't tell you when, you tell me when. 你好，我的名字是吴君怡，我很喜欢吃西瓜，而且你有听说这本书叫 Tiki Tiki Tembo, No Saw Rumbo, Cherry Berry Ruchi, Ching Chong Ding Dong Ling Ya.
Quickly before we move on to the next part of the discussion, I did only talk about racism in this part. For a lot of reasons, I thought it would be easier, it's quite a common example, etc. But racism is far from the only thing that you need to be keeping your eye out for. There's also sexism, homophobia, transphobia, ableism, the list goes on and on. You can pick your poison, really. But it does pay to be critical of authors and what they say about people who actually exist in the real world. Now, I want to delve a little bit deeper than surface level observation and talk about the things that make up a character. And this is what I like to call the 3 pillars of a character's description: their skin, their soul, and their story. The skin of a character is what you would see if they were standing right in front of you and what you would learn if you met them for the very first time. It's things like their gender, ethnicity, hair color, eye color, height, weight, skin tone, age, name, how they dress, how they move. It's like a character's outer shell, if you will. Then you have the character's soul, which is their needs, wants, fears, and sort of general worldview. The best way to get this information is to look at a character through a psychoanalytic lens, which we did in the first Analysis 101 video. And finally, there's the character's story, which is essentially their backstory. It encompasses all of the places, times, lessons, and relationships that are important to them. So now that you know a decent number of things that you can learn from a character analysis, let's look into how to start doing your own. A lot of people ask me during these discussions what they should be looking for and where they should start, and I find the easiest way to answer this question is to strip everything back to the very bare basics. So we're going to start by making a definition of what character analysis is. If you Google define character analysis, there are lots of different ways that people describe it, so I decided to make one with my own words that I think kind of encompasses everything. My definition is that character analysis can be described as a deep dive into the character's traits, personality, and actions, and how these things change over time. And our overall goal, the question that we really want to answer, is what makes them them? What is their motive? My sister told me the other day that she only just realized that motive is short for motivation. She's 23 years old. Now, for a lot of characters that people want to analyze, this is a lot easier said than done because the most interesting characters tend to have lots of really deep lore behind them, and their motives are really sort of murky and unclear and almost require a PhD just to begin to unravel. So the best thing for us to do at the beginning of a new analysis is use plot points to establish our thoughts. Remember the atom analogy? If we're talking super basic, like year 10 level science, every atom that is stable must have an equal number of protons and electrons. Likewise, character development is linked directly to plot points, and these two things work together to move a story forward. The beginning of the story is the introduction. This is where we meet our characters for the first time, and usually we'll also learn at least a little bit about their motivation. And just like real life, first meetings are extremely important. When you meet a new character, you want to take into consideration their actions, their feelings, their thoughts, and their speech. And as the story progresses, you're going to note how these things change. Next, we're introduced to the main conflict. You can think of this as the overall objective or the boss fight of the story. Short stories tend to only have one big conflict. Longer stories can have multiple big conflicts. But usually what works best for longer stories, at least, is they'll have one big conflict and lots of smaller conflicts that lead up to the big one. Sometimes this introduction happens really quickly, like in Ori and the Blind Forest, which is possibly my favorite video game ever. It happens right at the very beginning. But sometimes it takes a little bit longer, like in Bungo Stray Dogs, which is my favorite anime. We only get introduced to the concept of the book, which is the central conflict, in chapter 28, which was released in March of 2015, and for context, Bungo Stray Dogs debuted in December of 2012. And sometimes we think we know the main conflict, but as time goes on, we realize we were tricked, or the goalposts seem to be moving constantly and the characters themselves can't really figure out what they're meant to be doing. But anyway, the question that we want to ask ourselves at the introduction of the main conflict is whether our character's motive has changed because of it. So did we get a chance to learn about our characters before the major conflict began? And if so, were their before lives all that different? Whether the answer is yes or no, both styles of writing are really interesting for completely different reasons. By introducing us to a character and then later watching their motive change because of the core conflict, we feel as though we've gotten to know them better and we understand their core beliefs in a stronger way. But by dropping us into the middle of a conflict with no sense of who a character was before, you can get overwhelmed by this sense of chaos or abnormality. A show that does this really well actually is Black Summer. It's honestly one of my favourite zombie stories ever, and there are so many aspects that just put it a step above the rest. This is one of them. The next plot progression that we look into is the growth, or it's often called the rising action of the story. And at this point we ask ourselves, now that our character has their objective, how do they work towards it? Do they have a lot of smaller goals that they need to overcome so that they can grow stronger? Do they need to go off to get training in this mysterious faraway place so they can emerge a new hero? Do they have to learn a lot of lessons about themselves the hard way? Sometimes when a character is hyper-focused on one goal, they begin to lose sight of other things that are equally important. Like in High School Musical 2, Troy became so focused on becoming a professional basketballer and getting his foot in the door with Sharpay's family that he began to neglect his friends, and that nearly cost him very dearly. And while you could argue that yes, he was progressing in a way that was extremely important to him at the time, he was also regressing in terms of all the lessons that he learned in the first movie. We've all heard the phrase, it's not the journey, but the friends you make along the way, or the lessons you learn along the way, and that's what this part is entirely about. And unsurprisingly, this is usually the longest part of the story, and the most interesting as well, because we feel as though we're coming along for the ride with these characters. Then comes the moment that we've all been waiting for, the climax of the story. This is the part where all of our characters' hard work finally pays off. Or it doesn't. Sometimes they're not well enough prepared, or they're blindsided, or simply unlucky. There are usually some losses during this part that change the value of the outcome. In the love song of J. Alfred Prufrock, some people may struggle to pin down where the climax of the story is, being that it is a poem. I argue that it comes at the stanza that begins, "No, I am not Prince Hamlet, nor was meant to be." The reason for this is because we've finally come to a confrontation, not with anyone else, but with Prufrock himself. It's like he's talking to himself in the mirror. For the rest of the poem, he's dancing around the topic. It's the elephant in the room, it's the uncomfortable reality that he'd much rather ignore, and we watch him slowly work himself up to this like a spring that's coiling tighter, only to hit that final confrontation and immediately fall apart. And you could argue that maybe he shouldn't have forced himself to do this when he was so clearly not ready. But the role of the climax is not to provide us with this perfect, clear-cut ending, a happily ever after. It's to drive home a final message. That's why it's often referred to as the lesson or the moral of the story, and it's often impossible for the audience and even the characters themselves to know the true value of something until the climax has been and gone. And often it's impossible for anyone to know the limits to a character's true strength until they've been pushed all the way to the edge. The best thing about a character is you can push them to the point of death and face no consequences for it and just resurrect them like that to go again. Now remember the 4 things that I mentioned that are important to keep track of throughout a story: the character's thoughts, actions, feelings, and speech. These are things that a single character is responsible for, and we won't always have access to all 4 of them at the same time. It is practically impossible to write a story where a character takes no action whatsoever, so this is the one constant that we can rely on. But sometimes you can only guess what a character is thinking or feeling because we never get a view of the story from their perspective, or they never talk about it. And sometimes we never hear a character speak firsthand or get to read what they've written because other characters are always speaking for them. And the lack of these things is just as interesting as their presence, because we then get to ask, why were they left out, and was it done on purpose? Authors purposefully leave information out all the time, maybe to set up a plot twist, or create an unreliable narrator, or maybe they just want a character who's impossible to read. But it's important to note that just because these things aren't written down doesn't mean they don't exist. A character who never speaks still says things. A character whose motive isn't written down still has an objective. There's always plenty of space, regardless of the author's style or the genre of the text to mess around with these things and create something that's really gripping and intense. But at the end of the day, there is one more place that we can look to for information about a character, and that is how they interact with other characters. Are they nice to everyone? Are they nice to everyone except that one character that they can't stand? Do they seem nice, but once you dig a little deeper, you realize that they're actually kind of evil? Watching their interactions with others and how they change in different contexts can give you a lot of insight, so it's definitely worth looking into. The most important thing, as always, is to collect evidence as you go. A great way to do this is via annotation, which we are going to talk about at the end of the video. But with all of that, you are now ready to start analysing characters on your own. And if you want a bit more of a challenge, you can try combining what you've learned in this video with anything that I taught you in part 1 and 2 of the series. Some of you are always asking me to set you up with homework, for lack of a better word, so I do have a suggestion for once you've finished this video. I want you to look at Prufrock as a character and try analysing him specifically, so not the poem as a whole, but Prufrock himself with a psychoanalytic lens. And if you're up for a real challenge, I want you to analyse him using a post-structuralist lens. And I'd love to hear all of your thoughts and observations in the comments, as always. A quick note on unreliable narrators. I know a couple of people have a hard time spotting them because they've just never tried before, and I have mentioned them already a couple of times, so I'm going to walk you through a quick example with an explanation. There's this one episode in Supernatural, episode 15 in season 2 to be exact, where the two main characters, brothers Sam and Dean, take turns telling a story. Whenever Sam is telling it, he represents Dean as this sleazy, drunken mess who's incapable of investigating without making out with the nearest available woman or stuffing his face with whatever free food he can find.
Dean, what are you drinking?
I don't know, man. I think they're called Purple Nurple. I can't right now because I've got some feisty little wildcat on the hook. I'm about to reel her in.
All right, thanks.
Here.
But when Dean tells the story, he insists that he's investigating the way that anyone else would. And sure, there's this beautiful woman who's stuck to his side like Velcro, but Sam is just being a stuck-up, prudish little boy who's spending more time digging around into Dean's business than actually investigating the case.
Sorry, I can't even concentrate.
Dean, what do you think you're doing?
If you wouldn't mind, just give me 5 minutes here.
Dean, this is a very serious investigation. We don't have time for any of your blah, blah, blah.
And there are several pieces of information at our disposal that indicate that these two are being incredibly unreliable. First of all, once again, this episode takes place in season 2, so the viewers already have a pretty keen understanding of who these characters are and how they act from day to day. And second, we keep on watching the same scene happen multiple times from different points of view, so the details keep on changing. It also helps that the boys are recounting their story to Bobby, who's a family friend who's known them since they were really little, and they keep on interrupting and interjecting as they tell the story.
Ah, right. And that's how it really happened. I don't sound like that, Dean.
Come on, I ate 1, maybe 2.
Just let me tell it, okay?
But imagine if we didn't get to switch storytellers, then we'd be hearing everything from one person's perspective. Dean would claim that Sam said blah 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 blah, and we as an audience would either have to choose to take that at face value or to scrutinize it a little bit harder. The characterization of Sam, or in this case the mischaracterization, could be one giveaway, but the main thing is that everything is shown to us through Dean's perspective. We get our very own Dean lens. Every action, every word out of Sam's mouth is warped by Dean's perspective and memory. And this is super clear in this example because, again, we as an audience already know Sam, but we're also watching Dean recount the story to Bobby in real time. This is a technique called a frame narrative, or a story within a story, and it's extremely common for frame narratives to have unreliable narrators. Think the case study of Vanitas, No Longer Human, Slaughterhouse-5. I hope this helps to clear things up. And for anyone wondering, I was on Tumblr for the Mish-apocalypse of 2012. I remember it vividly. I am old enough to flinch at the mention of someone's shoelaces or the colour of the sky, and I will not be talking about that further. I'm not going to leave you without an example of my own, of course, and that example is going to be from Bungo Stray Dogs, of course. I'm going to share a scene with you that in the manga spans 2 chapters, 10 and 11, and in the anime spans 2 episodes, 9 and 10. I'm going to fill you in on the context surrounding this scene first, and we are going to read from the manga, mainly because it is the original version, but also because I fear I could not include the actual scene from the anime in this video without it getting taken down, so it's just a risk that I'm not willing to take. I do think it would technically be fair use, but we're not going to do that. As always, I have included links to the original so you can go through it at your own pace. In the manga, the scene picks up halfway through chapter 10 and then continues at the beginning of chapter 11. And in the anime, it begins in episode 9 at 15 minutes 40 seconds and then continues in episode 10 at 1 minute 46 seconds. And one more thing before we delve into the context of this scene, I have made a mini analysis about this on Tumblr before, so some of you may have seen it already. I want to make it clear that that post is far shorter than I wanted it to be, mainly because of the image limit. You can only post 10 images at a time. And it was also just kind of a, oh my god, I noticed this, and nothing else. So this is going to be much more in-depth than that, but you can read that post. I've linked that as well. I just don't want anyone thinking that I've stolen this analysis from some poor, unsuspecting Tumblr user. It's me, surprise! But anyway, I want to assure you that even if you've never seen Bungo Stray Dogs before, I'm going to fill you in on all of the relevant context so you will be able to keep up with this scene. Obviously, the best way to get a proper understanding is just to read it from chapter 1 or watch it from episode 1, but I'm not going to force anyone to do that. I know it's not everyone's favourite. If you've never come across Bungo Stray Dogs before, it's about this guy, Atsushi Nakajima, who, surprise, has the magical ability to turn into a white tiger. And he's recently become an employee of the Armed Detective Agency, which is a specialty workforce that's dedicated to solving crimes committed by other magical ability users. If any of the names are familiar in this story, by the way, it's because all of the characters are based off of real-life classics authors. About 5 chapters ago, Atsushi discovered that he has a bounty on his head and that the Port Mafia, the yin to the agency's yang, is out to get him. Specifically this guy, Akutagawa Ryunosuke, who Atsushi was warned about in chapter 3. I'll give you a tip on surviving in this city: don't run into this person. If you do, flee. And about 3 chapters ago, Atsushi came face to face with one of the Mafia's deadliest assassins, a young girl named Kyoka Izumi. Atsushi realizes as they're fighting that Kyoka is being directly controlled by the Mafia and that she wants nothing more than to never kill again. Kyoka seems to sense that he wants to help her, and so she trusts him, and together they make this impossible escape. Once they've both recovered from their wounds, Atsushi takes it upon himself to take Kyoka for a fun day out. They go to the local parks and markets, eat crepes, play arcade games. It's everything she hasn't been able to do since she was taken in by the Mafia, and Atsushi understands this feeling because he too grew up as an orphan and he too missed out on these experiences. But at the end of the day, disaster. Akutagawa had been tracking them the entire time. He finds them and kidnaps them so that he can go collect the bounty for the Mafia. But fear not, because once they realize what's happening, the president of the agency, Fukuzawa, demands that everyone drops what they're doing immediately and searches for them. Some take more convincing than others to actually try to look for them, namely Rampo, who tends to take a while longer to warm up to newcomers, and also just trying to get Rampo to work is like getting blood out of a stone. But in no time at all, they locate Atsushi and Kyoka, and long story short, these two break themselves out of another sticky situation and come back to be welcomed by the agency with open arms. In amongst all of this, however, another story is unfolding. This is Dazai Osamu. Dazai is the one who found Atsushi and hired him into the agency. He's somewhat like a mentor, and he plays a very important role in the overall story of Bungo Stray Dogs. Okay, pause. I do need to mention that Dazai has this running gag. His life motto, according to one of the guidebooks, is to achieve a clean, bright, and cheerful suicide, preferably with a beautiful woman. I have a whole video already talking about Dazai and his complexity as a character. He's one of my favorite characters of all time, and so I could can confidently say that he's mostly joking when he says things like this, but I totally understand if it makes you uncomfortable. That's kind of like half the point. I have left a list of mental health resources for all across the world in the description, so if you're struggling with your mental health, you want to talk to someone about it, please do that. Even if you don't think it's going to help, just trying to reach out is actually a huge step that can help immensely on its own. I've also included a link to that video about Dazai, so if you want to see what this seemingly random obsession is all about, you can go check that out. But TLDR, I unfortunately cannot talk about this scene without making mention of Dazai's suicide obsession. If you want to continue the video but just skip over this part, go to this timestamp and you'll see where we start talking about Annotation. He's a bit of an enigma and a bit of a loose cannon. You never truly know what he's planning or what his next move is going to be. He's even a mystery to the other characters. It was revealed pretty early on that there was a running bet on who would guess what Dazai's past job was before he joined the agency. Apparently it had been going on for years by the time Atsushi had shown up and nobody had been able to get it right, but you can't really blame them because who would guess that their co-worker was once an executive for the Port Mafia? Yeah. And not only this, but Octagawa. This Octagawa, the same Octagawa, was once his subordinate. In the scene leading up to the one that we're analysing, Dazai reveals that he always thought very lowly of Octagawa, and that he thinks that Atsushi is far more talented than Octagawa ever was. This of course causes Octagawa to have a very violent reaction, but Dazai doesn't seem phased at all, because Dazai's magical skill is called No Longer Human, and it is an ability nullifier. This means that if he's touching someone or even touching them through something else, they are unable to activate their skill. Oh, and by the way, during this very uncomfortable reunion, Dazai is chained to the wall of the Port Mafia's torture basement. Did I mention that? I definitely forgot to mention that. And when I say torture basement, I don't mean that figuratively. I mean it is a basement where Dazai himself used to torture people when he was an executive. I'll give you the power of foresight for a second. We do get flashbacks in later scenes that depict this, and it is just as terrifying as you might imagine. It's not exactly a situation that any sane person wants to end up in, but Dazai's just chillin'. Like, he's standing there chained to the wall, but his body language is totally relaxed. He's humming a little tune. He even tries to crack a joke when Octagawa walks in. This whole situation is very strange, but it gets stranger. What if I told you that Dazai has been missing from the agency for something like 2 or 3 days at this stage, and no one's gone looking for him or even raised the alarm? I mean, Atsushi tried, but the reaction was pretty non-committal. And this is already kind of concerning. Like, you would hope that if you worked in a city with a very powerful mafia and you directly opposed them in your everyday life and you went missing, people would at least be worried about you. But then add the knowledge of what happened when the agency learned that Atsushi and Kyoko went missing, and it makes absolutely no sense. It's an inconsistency, right? Like, how can they be so protective over people that they barely know and then leave one of their best to die in the mafia's basement? Isn't that the question? One thing that you need to know about the Armed Detective Agency is that they are pros of splitting up and looking for clues, Mystery Inc. style. One thing you need to know about Dazai is that he is Mr. Bungo Stray Dog. If he were a pet, he'd be the type to just wander off for days or weeks at a time, but you'd never have to worry because he always comes back for dinner. Seeing as he's been a member of the agency for multiple years at this point, it follows that they understand his habits well and that this is even a relatively regular occurrence at this point. It's important to remember that we as an audience have been dropped into the middle of this conflict, and we currently don't have an understanding of what a quote-unquote normal day at the agency looks like. We don't know beyond a surface level what their relationships with each other are like, and that is the entire point of this part of the story. We are finally getting to see what makes the agency tick. I have to bring this up because the number of honest-to-God arguments that I have seen, and unfortunately maybe participated in, about this scene is just far too high. A concerning number of people believe that this is solid evidence that the agency does not care for Dazai at all, and this is an argument that only exists because they think he's going to go back to work for the Port Mafia again in the future. And I'm not going to explain why that argument exists because we don't have all day, and also just spoilers. But I do want to give you the opportunity to think about this as we finally approach the scene that we're going to analyse, which is one of my favourite scenes, not only in Bungo Stray Dogs, but in all media that I've ever seen. Pause. There are lots of different fan translations available for this manga. You can find them on BSD Bibliophile, which I've included the link for in the description, and if you click on this tab, you will find all of the Bungo Stray Dogs manga. For the sake of this video, I am including images of the artwork, but I've edited out all of the text. This is because I've read as many different variations of this scene that I could find, including the official translation here, and different translators will word the same line of text very differently. There's no real right or wrong answer to what was actually said, so I've used my discretion to choose what I feel is the best dialogue for this scene, and sometimes I've mixed different translations together or thrown in a little bit of extra information so that those who've never seen Bungo Stray Dogs before will still be able to keep up with what's going on. The changes that I made are very minimal because I didn't want to ruin the integrity of the scene, but I still wanted to warn you that this is something that I've done just in case you're following along with your own version of the manga. I also want to give you a content warning. As I mentioned earlier, there are multiple mentions of suicide throughout this scene. There's also some physical violence, including the use of a knife. This is the final time that I'll change positions while filming, I promise. I know this has been a total mess compared to the others, but I genuinely do not have the energy to film for more than like 2 hours at a time right now. Also, once again, because I want to maintain the integrity of this scene, I didn't risk trying to memorize any of it. I've written it all down and I'm going to be reading directly from my laptop for this. Honestly, I'm debating whether I'll even include video. We'll see. I like to have the option of video as well, just in case. It begins with Dazai. His face is bruised from where Octagawa hit him and his clothes seem a little disheveled, but otherwise there's no real change physically to his condition. Both his hands are still chained to the wall and there's a soft dripping noise in the empty space echoing off the concrete. He looks bored. He yawns. He thinks to himself, if I'm not mistaken, by now they should also be, and cuts himself off with a harsh yank at the handcuffs. Suddenly he looks focused and sharp, a completely different man to the one we were just looking at. It's about time, I'd say. Before he can so much as lift a finger, a loud voice cuts through the silence. I see you're as crafty and conniving as ever, Dazai. There's the sound of booted footsteps coming down the stairs, and Dazai looks genuinely shocked, maybe even fearful, for the first time. He pauses, as if taking a second to process what he just heard. That voice. What a glorious view! A man stands at the bottom of the stairs, smirking, relaxed, and clearly very pleased with the situation. Not even 10 billion of the greatest artworks could outclass it. A name card appears beside him. Chuya Nakahara, Mafia Executive. Skill? Upon the Tainted Sorrow. Upon a closer inspection of Chuya's face, there's something deeply vindictive in his expression. You can't help but wonder, is there something that Dazai did to him personally that makes him feel this way? Or is this guy just so deeply involved in the Mafia that he takes the fact that Dazai left as a personal slight? Should we be worrying right now? Was I wrong to assume that Dazai has this all under control? We don't have long enough to truly panic over this predicament because almost immediately this happens. Dazai is clearly far from pleased, but he's not afraid. The initial shock seems to have worn off, and if anything, he looks disgusted. Crap. Oh, crap. Chuya slowly walks towards him, cracking his knuckles. And what a lovely reaction. I'm so happy I could just strangle you. Wow, Dazai says, and for the first time we see the two of them standing in a single frame. As it turns out, Chuya is about a head shorter. The pipsqueak in black has some mouth. Chuya freezes and swallows nervously. Dazai has fully recovered at this point and is regarding Chuya with a dull look. I've always wanted to ask you, but why did you buy that embarrassing hat? Chuya starts tapping his foot, clearly agitated. That's rich coming from you, vagabond. You're the one going on about suicide when you're in the prime of your life. Yeah? Dazai looks at him blankly, as if he'd just said something as equally obvious as the sky is blue, and Chuya scowls at him. He could at least try to deny it. In the next second, he's flinging his hand to the side, swishing his coat, taking up more space and switching back to the image of a fearsome mafia exec. But now, you're nothing more than a pathetic prisoner. Moves you to tears, no? Wait. He narrows his eyes. Now that I think about it, this is rather suspicious. He leans into Dazai's personal space and grabs his hair in a motion that's similar to how you might scruff a cat. You might fool that inexperienced Aktagawa, but not me. I am your, he looks him dead in the eye, old friend, after all. What are you up to? He lets go and Dazai leans back against the wall, rattling the handcuffs as he gestures vaguely. What, well, isn't it obvious? That same bored expression is back. I'm awaiting my execution. The air surrounding them seems to go very still, the calm before a storm. The great Dazai would never allow himself to be caught out of sheer negligence. Chuya had started speaking softly, but as he goes on, his words become filled with more venom. If you were that incompetent, I would have killed you long ago. He makes for a terrifying picture. We have no idea what his ability, Tainted Sorrow, is at this stage, but you can feel the power rolling off of him in waves. Whatever it is, it makes him incredibly strong, almost godlike. Dazai is unfazed. You're being paranoid. Your hair will fall out if you fret too much. He pauses. Are you... Chuya rolls his eyes and takes off his hat. I'm not trying to hide a bald patch, just for your information. He puts the hat back on. I didn't come all the way here to chat with you. Then why are you here? Why? Chuya smiles, but there's no joy in his expression. To spite you. This catches Dazai's attention, but his face barely changes. Chuya looks down as he goes on, almost like he's reminiscing. Back then, your spite was like a fine art. You made a fool out of everyone, both your friends and your foes. But now... Chuya's boot scrapes across the floor, and the next second he winds up a powerful roundhouse kick that hits the wall directly behind Dazai's head with a deep boom. You'll get a taste of your own medicine, but multiplied tenfold. The concrete behind Dazai is cracked. Little chips are crumbling down to the floor. The long chains connected to his handcuffs have been broken, and he's staring at the damage with a genuine look of fear. Chuya points a single-gloved hand at Dazai. I don't know what you're up to, but your plan is ruined. Fight me, Dazai. He takes a wide stance, holding his coat over one shoulder and crooking his finger, beckoning him forward. I'll destroy you and that devious plan of yours. The fear on Dazai's face has been replaced with a cold look. He considers the cuffs still around his wrists. Chuya. Ha! Dazai snaps his fingers and the cuffs clatter to the floor. He holds up a single bobby pin with a smirk. You think you can stop my plan? You're joking, right? Chuya frowns, but he also looks impressed. It's almost like he expected this to happen. So you could have escaped at any moment? He drops into a lower stance and rushes towards Dazai. Now that's much more interesting. Chuya throws a flurry of punches so fast you can't even see them moving, but somehow Dazai manages to dodge every single one. Suddenly he grabs Chuya's wrist, surprising him, and delivers a single powerful punch to his stomach. Chuya doubles over, and his eyes are hidden in the shadow of his hat. Dazai watches him carefully. Chuya smiles. You call that a punch? He whips out another incredibly powerful kick. Dazai barely has the chance to widen his eyes a little before he's sent flying back into another wall. It's hardly even a massage. Chuya puts his foot down and slowly walks towards Dazai, where he's slumped to the ground, surrounded by even more cracked concrete. Your close combat skills have always been below average in the Mafia. It's your nullifying ability that made you a nuisance. Not that it'd do you any good. I didn't even need to use mine. He comes to a stop right in front of him, standing tall and prideful. Get up. The party's barely started. Dazai doesn't look up, but he smiles. As expected of the Mafia's best martial artist. Chuya's grin drops as Dazai jumps to his feet, making a quiet thud echo through the room. He stands slowly and stretches his arms above his head with a crack. I thought you were going to break my guarding arm. Chuya glares as he thinks back on the last moments of their clash. He raised his arm to block me at the last moment? So he's predicting my moves. Dazai relaxes back into a nonchalant position, waving his hand like he's discussing a minor inconvenience. I've known you for a long time, after all. I can sense your timing. I know all your habits like the back of my hand. If I didn't, I could never be your partner, now could I? Chuya's eye twitches, and he grinds his teeth together so hard you can hear something snap, and he's right in front of Dazai again, moving so fast that time seems to slow to a standstill. He's fast, Dazai thinks, but Chuya is yelling over the top. Then you saw this attack coming too, right? Dazai is too slow to block the punch. He takes it square on the cheek and staggers backwards, skidding a little from the impact, but Chuya keeps coming. "Now this," he cries, and something in his tone makes Dazai look up in horror. "This is how you throw a punch." He hits him right in the stomach, winding him, and shoves him back against the wall with a hand around his throat. "You think you could win just by predicting my moves?" He tightens his grip and Dazai pulls at his fingers, his hand, his wrist, desperate to try and get out of the chokehold. "It's over." Chuya pulls out a wicked-looking knife with a long serrated blade. "Just tell me one thing first. Why did you let yourself get caught? What are you waiting for in this place?" Dazai slumps in his grip, but he doesn't let go of Chuya's wrist. He looks a little ticked off, maybe, but certainly not like a man who's facing certain death, and he doesn't say anything. Not telling? Chuya presses the edge of the blade against Dazai's neck. "Suit yourself. It just makes the torture more fun for me. I did it mostly for Atsushi." Chuya pulls the knife away and slackens his grip enough so Dazai can speak, but he's clearly confused. "Atsushi? The were-tiger you're all so obsessed with? I wanted to know which rich bastard put that bounty of 70 billion yen on his head." Chuya looks incredulous and deeply amused. "You risked your own neck for him? What a touching story. But I must say," he tightens his grip again and Dazai swallows nervously, "look where that's gotten you. You're truly a shadow of the man you once were, Sir Youngest Leader in the Mafia's history." For a moment, we see the Dazai Chuya is talking about. He looks almost the same, except that he's younger and wearing a black overcoat, and he has a bandage wrapped around his head and covering his right eye. The Dazai of now just fixes Chuya with a deeply unimpressed look, but he doesn't say anything. "Still, how unfortunate of you." Chuya is smirking and playing with the knife. "I was away for 6 months suppressing small fry in the West, and you were captured on the day of my return. Damn lucky, if you ask me." Chuya snaps immediately from happy to aggressive. "What's so funny?" Dazai smiles cryptically. "Let me tell you something. Tomorrow, the 5 executives of the Mafia will meet." The news hits Chuya like a slap in the face, and he would have stumbled back if not for his grip on Dazai's neck. "All 5? There's no way. That only happens once every few years when we decide the direction of the organization. Surely they would have contacted..." Dazai cuts him off. "It's because of a letter I sent the other day, and now it's just a bet," but he fixes Chuya with a cold stare and smiles eerily, and you can't help but wonder if this is what Mafia Dazai looked like. "I don't think you're going to kill me. In fact, you'll let me go, and you'll point me in the direction of the one offering the bounty. Then you'll leave this room, talking and walking like an anime girl." Chuya lets his anger boil over for a mere second. "What?" Dazai puts both hands up in a mock surrender. "My predictions always come true. I thought you knew that." Chuya's anger simmers down into confusion. "In this situation? Don't be stupid." And then he realizes. What letter? One that reads, "All of your secrets will be brought to light on the occasion of Dazai's death." It takes just a second for the information to sink in, but then Chuya is leaping away, releasing his grip with a look of utter horror. "You couldn't have..." Dazai takes the opportunity to stretch again, rubbing at his neck. "I, an executive turned traitor, have been captured, but the current executives have received a letter that basically says if Dazai dies, all your dirty little secrets will be revealed. If the authorities get hold of these secrets, the executives would each die 100 deaths. That's easily serious enough to call for a conference, don't you think?" Chuya is sweating now, but he still challenges this. "The Mafia won't be threatened so easily. You'll die for this." The room has gone quiet and still again, tense from the discussion. "Maybe. But that will be discussed in the meeting. And if you take the initiative to kill me before they decide, well, that's treason. You'd be dismissed. Or even executed." Chuya stares at him incredulously, totally at a loss. "And even if I disregard it all and kill you anyway, you'd just be glad to die, wouldn't you?" Dazai smiles at him and waves his hands. "Exactly! If you're gonna do it, better get started." Chuya stares intensely at the knife in his hand. "Come on, hurry up!" He's switching his gaze from the knife to Dazai, back to the knife, practically vibrating with indecision. "I don't have all day, you know." The knife clatters to the ground, and Dazai relaxes a little. "Well, giving up already? That's too bad. The idea of Chuya being hunted by the Mafia because of me, that just has a nice ring to it, don't you think? Damn it. Chuya clenches his fist and is hit with another realization. Wait. He thinks back to what Dazai said, the reason he claimed to be there at all. I did it mostly for Atsushi. Does that mean... Chuya holds his head in his hands. Your second objective is to force me into an impossible dilemma? Dazai looks away, but his happy Chuya finally caught on. Chuya continues to think out loud, more horrified with every word. I didn't come here to spite you. You were waiting to spite me? Dazai smiles, and this time it looks a lot more genuine. I haven't seen you in a while after all. I thought I'd give you a little surprise. Chuya just stares at him for a moment, then doubles over like he was punched. I'll kill you. I swear I'll kill you. Oh, before that, you've got a job to do. You broke the chains, so if I just run off now, you'll be suspected of aiding my escape, won't you? If you're willing to listen to me, I can stage this so it looks like someone from the agency came to rescue me. Dazai has backed Chuya into a corner, and Chuya, for his part, kinda just looks like he wishes the ground would swallow him whole. You expect me to trust you? I never lie when I make a deal. I thought you knew that. You bastard! Chuya slumps to the ground in defeat. What do you want? Dazai is still stretching and rubbing at his neck. I already told you. As quickly as he'd fallen, Chuya stands back upright, grabbing his coat and slinging it over his shoulder. If it's about the man-tiger, Akutagawa is in charge of that case. He should have some records in the correspondence archive on the second floor. Dazai nods to himself. Ah, just as I thought. Chuya bites his tongue to stop himself from continuing on with the same argument and turns away in a huff, making for the stairs that lead out of the basement. Just get the hell out of here when you're done. Dazai is content to watch him leave, but his fun isn't over. Why, thank you, but you got something wrong. My current dream is to commit suicide with a beautiful woman. Letting you kill me would be so unsatisfying. Sorry. Chuya barely looks over his shoulder, his boots tapping against the stairs as he makes his slow ascent. Right. I'll try to find a suicidal beauty for you then. You can practically see stars in Dazai's eyes as he perks up. Chuya, you were actually a nice person all along. I'm telling you to hurry up and die, you idiot. And I'm warning you in advance, Dazai. He pauses halfway up the stairs and turns just enough to jab a finger back at him. You won't be so lucky next time. Dazai completely ignores the threat and leans forward with a hand beside his mouth. No, you're forgetting something. Chuya pauses and slowly turns away. He's entirely still, and Dazai is staring up at him with wide-eyed expectation, silently cheering for him to make the right decision. And Chuya turns, locking his knees together and pointing his toes inward, speaking high-pitched like an anime girl. Next time you won't be so lucky! Dazai bursts into a fit of laughter, and the scene finally comes to a close. This scene is truly a spectacle. If you're coming across it for the first time, I hope that it entertained you as much as it did me. Now, I know some of you aren't going to bother, but if you do watch the anime version, you'll notice that there are a couple of differences in the way that they represented the scene. Some of them are very small, like where the knife ends up, for example. In the anime, somehow it gets buried into the wall, and at one point Dazai throws it at Chuya, and Chuya catches it like it was no big deal. But some of them are very big, like at the end of the scene, Dazai doesn't laugh at Chuya's anime girl impression, and this makes Chuya start yelling at him. This is kind of funny in its own way, but it is a big point of contention as to why a lot of fans don't like the anime as much as they like the manga. I do agree that it tells a very different story about their dynamic, and I'm going to leave it to you to try and decide what that difference is. Now, there are two reasons that I wanted to discuss this scene today. Aside from the obvious, I love it more than life itself. First, it's an excellent introduction to Chuya's character, and second, it's an excellent introduction to Dazai and Chuya's relationship. I genuinely don't think that this specific scene could have been written any more perfectly, and I will now explain why. I spent a decent portion of time earlier introducing you to Dazai and discussing his role at the agency. Everything that I told you in the span of a couple of minutes, the audience already knew from reading chapters 1 through 9 or watching episodes 1 through 8. And unfortunately, because of time constraints, etc., I couldn't actually present you this information the way that it was presented in the original. Because of all of these issues, I had to just straight up tell you who Dazai was, how he acts, why he's like this. But you'll have noticed through looking at that scene, or if you're already a fan, or if you decide to give BSD a go because of this video, that the author, Kafka Asagiri, and illustrator, Sango Harakawa, are experts at showing, not telling. If you're a writer or you're practicing writing, you've probably heard a million times that audiences don't want to be told what's happening. We want to see it with our own eyes and figure out for ourselves what's going on. And what Asagiri and Harakawa have done in this scene is plop us right into the middle of a really awkward reunion. It's like walking into your friend's family's Christmas dinner and watching the politics unfold in real time. It's like watching a car crash. You cannot look away, but it's horrifying. And just like sitting in on Christmas dinner with your friend's family, you're not being told who you should like, who you should dislike, who you should agree with, what's going on. You're just left to try and figure things out for yourself. That's exactly what this scene does. Like I mentioned as we were reading, the face that Dazai makes when he realizes that he's dealing with Chuya of all people is one that I genuinely don't think we've seen on him since. It looks like genuine shock and horror, and it's only with hindsight that we realize he was acting here. But while Dazai is acting, Chuya is not. And so that expression that he had, that vindication, the smugness on his face is real, and it still begs the question, what the hell did Dazai do to him? I'm not going to tell you in this video because this remains a mystery for several chapters after. If any of you are absolutely desperate and you don't want to watch it, I might answer your question in the comments. But despite all of this, despite any reservations that they both might have, they very quickly fall into a pattern of old habits. First, Dazai initiates some banter, and then surprisingly, Chuya banters right back. And their regular dynamic starts to really shine through. We see quick-witted quips and inside jokes and these shared, knowing looks. In all of this, we have an acknowledgement of what they once were and how they still kind of are whatever that thing is. You can call it whatever you want. Partners, boyfriends, best friends, work buddies. It doesn't matter how you want to define it. What truly matters is that they have an incredibly strong relationship. Then we come up to the fight, and to me, this was an opportunity for Asagiri and Harakawa to show off how strong Dazai and Chuya are individually. And while we already have an idea of who Dazai is, we haven't really seen him fight up until this point, unless you count some evading maneuvers, so this is new information for both characters. I think for early on in Bungo Stray Dogs, this is also one of the best fight scenes. It's quick, it's dirty, it's realistic, dare I say. There are too many stories where a character takes like 100 punches and they barely have a blemish on their face. You know exactly what I'm talking about. These two actually get knocked about in this hand-to-hand combat, and I think that that's really fun and interesting. And the fight continues the idea that they know each other really well. They keep on predicting each other's moves and hitting certain weak spots. But it's also the first indicator that they've both really grown in their time apart, they've picked up new habits, and they're able to surprise each other with their moves. And then, checkmate. Chuya wins, and as he does, he reveals to the audience that Dazai was once the youngest executive in Port Mafia history. And we see a flashback, undoubtedly from Chuya's perspective, of what Port Mafia Dazai looked like. And I want to note here that in the manga, his outfit for the Mafia looks very similar to the one that he wears at the agency. He's just got a different coat and some bandages on his face. However, in the anime, Dazai is wearing what we come to know as his Mafia outfit. It's completely different from head to toe. And there are two potential reasons for this discrepancy. Number one, which I think is the actual reason, is that Sango Harakawa hadn't yet designed Dazai's Mafia outfit, or maybe she was still tweaking it at the time that this chapter was released. twist. And number 2, which is more of a fan theory, is that Chuya is mixing up the imagery that he remembers with the imagery right in front of him. He's essentially projecting Mafia Dazai onto Agency Dazai. Memory is inherently untrustworthy. It is extremely rare for you to remember something with 100% accuracy, so this is a viable answer. But regardless, this new version of Dazai is completely different to the Dazai that we know, which surrounds him with this level of intrigue. And now, though Chuya has physically won the fight, Dazai very quickly turns the tables by revealing that he knows something about a really important meeting with all 5 of the Mafia's executives. And this once again paints us with a picture of their dynamic, with Dazai as the brains and Chuya as the brawn. I do want to point out that Chuya is extremely smart. I say this mostly because it's true, but also I don't want people to yell at me. But it doesn't matter how smart you are when you go up against someone like Dazai. He is truly on another level, especially when it comes to predictions and strategy. This supposed meeting has a huge effect on Chuya, and for anyone who's up to date on the manga and has also read the light novel Stormbringer, we can understand why this is such a big deal, especially for Chuya. It's easy as someone who doesn't know to look at Chuya's reaction and be like, okay, get a grip. But when you know, just the thought of it actually gives me goosebumps. Like right now, the hair on the back of my neck is standing up. As someone with that hindsight, this is a bit of a cruel move for Dazai to pull, and the reaction that Chuya had was honestly like kind of understated, I'm not going to lie. Whether you understand the full weight of Dazai's words in this moment doesn't really matter, because the revelation shifts the power balance and they're back to bantering again. This really just goes to show the volatility of their relationship. And then we reach the climax of this scene where Chuya realizes that he's been punked. Dazai had 2 goals. Number 1, piss Chuya off, which honestly I think he could have done even if Chuya wasn't there. And 2, set Chuya up with an impossible task, a test of loyalty. I'm giving you the power of hindsight once again. Dazai has been missing from the Mafia for 4 years at this point. He quite literally vanished without a trace. Nobody has been able to find him, and Chuya now finally has him where he wants him. So even if we don't truly understand why he's so angry, why he's so keen to punish Dazai, we can empathize with him. We've all wanted something before, and I'm sure that many of us have fantasized about that thing just falling into your lap without any work required. That is exactly what's happened to Chuya in this moment. But now he has a choice to make. He can enact his revenge just the way he's wanted to for 4 years already, or he can stay loyal and true to the Mafia. We come to learn later that perhaps Chuya's greatest weakness is his loyalty. It's been used against him before, and we know already that Dazai did this on purpose, but this just adds another twist of cruelty to it. And just like Dazai predicted, Chuya, of course, chooses loyalty, and with a final jab at Dazai's unfortunate habits, he turns to leave. In the final portion of the scene, Dazai has no reason to be acting anymore, and he looks genuinely happy for the first time, especially when Chuya does his anime girl impression and fulfills the final part of Dazai's prophecy. Now, as far as I'm aware, we don't actually know why Chuya does this exact impression. I might have missed something. If I'm being honest, I haven't super duper looked into it. As of filming, I'm under the impression that it's just an inside joke. There could be some information that I've missed. It's happened before, so if that's the case, please let me know in the comments. And personally, when it comes to the difference in the ending between the manga and the anime, I am a much bigger fan of the manga where Dazai laughs. I just think that it rounds out the scene very nicely. Overall, in this scene, we got a lot of new information. We got a new character introduction, a look into some of Dazai's backstory, an introduction to Chuya's motive, and we built on some of Dazai's overall motive as well. We also learned a little bit about the Mafia, and we got a brief glimpse into its history, and all of this happened in a single dark room with 2 characters who were having a conversation. And remember what I said about looking at how a character interacts with other characters? The way that Dazai and Chuya interact is totally unique. Dazai does not interact with anyone else the same way, and neither does Chuya, which could mean nothing. Maybe. I would love to know your thoughts on this scene, especially if you've never come across Bungo Stray Dogs before, or maybe if you're already a fan of Bungo Stray Dogs but you've never really looked into what the scene might mean. Hello, sorry I look like this and have to speak like this. I'm filming this post-surgery, as you can see. Everything's going great with recovery. But genuinely, the day that I went in for surgery, so like 2 days after I actually filmed this video, there was a new interview with Kafka Asagiri, the author of Bungo Stray Dogs, released. And in that interview, he gave some very interesting information about Dazai and Chuya's separation since Dazai left the Mafia. And basically, he revealed to us that the entire time that Dazai was gone, Chuya was convinced that he was dead, because he couldn't find him anywhere. To Chuya, this was the only logical explanation, because Dazai had literally just disappeared off the face of the earth, and this changes a couple of things about my personal perception of the scene. One thing that I didn't mention when I was filming, because I forgot to note it down in the script, is that there is a certain level of relief here in their interactions with each other. It's the relief that you feel when you see someone that you haven't seen for a very long time and you're just happy that they're okay and they're doing well. That is very evident to me in the subtext of the scene. But now knowing that Chuya thought Dazai was dead, it brings that relief to the forefront of my mind when I look at them and how they interact, and I think it might with you guys as well. And that vindictive look that Chuya gives at the beginning of the scene that I keep on mentioning could also now be joy, if you will. Joy isn't the right word to describe it. It's more like, how do I say this? It's a relief, and also like he's patting himself on the back, like I knew he couldn't be dead. Like he's just very happy, okay? People often argue about whether Dazai and Chuya actually hate each other. I think that hate is a bit too strong a word. I don't think that it runs that deep, because I think that they genuinely do care for each other quite a lot. And again, however you want to think of that, whether you think of them as brothers, best friends, boyfriends, partners, whatever, they care about each other. That's all that matters, and that's what this scene is all about. But yes, obviously I didn't want to refilm this whole bit because I'm speaking like a teenage boy right now. But also because I've said before, maybe not on YouTube, but definitely on TikTok, it's really important as analysts and as people who make fan theories about works, especially if they're still in progress, that we are prepared to be proven wrong at any point. I don't think that anything I said is necessarily incorrect, but this new information that we were given definitely spins the whole scene in a new light, to me at least. Mainly with how that level of relief just seems to kind of skyrocket, you know? If this has changed your opinion on the scene, I would love to hear what you think. If it hasn't, then I'd also love to hear why. But yeah, I'm not going to subject you to my terrible raspy voice anymore. I'll continue with the video.
Now this video is already so long, but I did promise you 2 topics, and it's time to discuss the second, which is annotation. And don't worry, this section is far simpler and far shorter, mainly because annotation in itself should be kept simple. I get asked quite often, what is the difference between annotating and just scribbling in the margins? And it's not much, if I'm being honest. That's kind of a lie, because there is at least one difference that I could think of with all of the brain power that I had while I was writing this script, and that is the use of a system. Annotation is all about making things easier for you to understand, making specific plot points easier to find, and making certain themes and ideas actually visible. So let's say that you're using a red sticky tab to indicate a specific theme. Once you've finished the book and you close it, you can look at every point where there is a red tab, and you can see visually where that point takes place throughout the novel. You might notice that this theme is really spread out, or that it's clumped together in certain parts, or that it just doesn't exist in certain areas. And you can ask yourself why that is, and this is actually a really easy way to figure out whether a certain character kind of represents a theme or appears alongside it at least. Now I have talked briefly about annotation before, specifically how to prepare yourself for it, but I'm going to go over that once more for you. First, you want to read your entire text from front to back if you haven't already, and you want to avoid writing notes as much as possible for this first read through. The only thing that I would suggest for you to write during your first read through is any questions that you might have. Remember that first looks are important, so if you have any really strong thoughts about a character or a plot point or whatever as you're reading for the first time, write it down, because I promise with hindsight when you go back,
everything's going to change regardless of what the story is. But by doing this first read through, you're allowing yourself some time to figure out what themes and ideas really jump out at you. Which ones do you want to focus on for your analysis? Certain types of analysis will come more easily to some people than others. You might find character design really interesting, so the way that they dress and whether that indicates anything about them, but maybe your friend is more into the psychoanalytical aspect, so they want to look into how the characters think. Both of these make for really, really interesting analyses. I have personally done both of these before, and they're really fun, but totally different experiences. The next step is to write your themes down, and you really want to make sure that you're not trying to focus on any more than 5 at a time. Most texts will only have a handful of broader themes anyway, and a really good way to check whether you're getting too stuck into the minute detail is by seeing whether you can clump any of your ideas together. So for example, with Bungo Stray Dogs, when I first looked into analysing it, I kept on noticing ideas of the cycle of abuse, trauma, and war, and these 3 things are very easily interconnected, so I grouped them into one theme, and I kind of look at them all at the same time. If there are more themes that you want to cover, that is great. I would suggest to make multiple passes over the text so you're not going crazy trying to pick out all these tiny minute details. Trust me, I've been there before. It's not fun. I never even finished it. Once you've organized your thoughts and you know what you're doing, you're ready to start. And now, of course, I also have some tips and suggestions that will just make the physical act of annotation a lot easier for you. First, if you're using sticky notes or tabs or flags, make sure you get translucent ones. These do not have to be expensive. You can get them cheaply online. You can get them cheaply in most stationery stores. You can also get them expensively if you want, I don't know. It just ensures that any text that might be covered by the note or the flag isn't going to be invisible. This is extremely important if you're annotating manga or comics or any other kind of visual work. I really recommend tracing paper sticky notes. This does look opaque, but it is translucent, I promise. It's also really easy to write on. And most places that sell stationery now have these. They're the J. Burroughs brand. Any Australians know this is like a home brand. I'm pretty sure I paid like $4 for this pack, which is really nothing. Sticky notes are expensive. They should not be. StudyMate and Unco are other really good home brands within Australia for cheap office supplies. These are perfectly good quality for annotating anything that you want to. Also, I want to point out that if you're a little bit precious about marking up your books, which I know some people are, there's nothing against it, you can use colored tabs like this as highlight markers. Removable highlights. Another great option for if you don't want to actually write in the book that you're annotating is to, of course, write on a sticky note and put that in, or have a notebook or a tab on your phone or your laptop or whatever. If you're writing something separately to the book, make sure you note down the page number, because it's going to be a nightmare to try and find that information again, I promise. You can also take a photo of the page and annotate on your phone. I've done that heaps of times, especially with library books, and it's actually really fun. Make sure if you're annotating multiple themes at a time that you do use really different colours so that they're easy to distinguish when you look back on it. If you want to make it look aesthetically pleasing, do it. I feel like there are some people who are like, oh my god, you're spending way too much time making it look like a Pinterest photo, but who cares? If it brings you joy, there's no harm in it. If you're really stuck for themes, if you don't know what you want to look for, you can use websites like SparkNotes to get an idea. You can also use forums, communities. You can come to my page. I recently opened up a YouTube community, which kind of works like a subreddit or a Facebook page. You guys can make posts of your own about the topics that we discuss in videos, and I would really, really love to see your annotation and analysis. My goal is to build a positive community where we can all try to help each other and encourage each other to learn, and I think this is the perfect place to do it. So please share your analyses, share your annotations. The only prerequisite is that you have to be subscribed to me for a week. This is mostly just to filter out bots and hate, etc. Remember that annotation is a big job, especially if you're going through a bigger book or, God forbid, a series, which I'm attempting and it's killing me slowly. But talking to people and sharing your updates can really helped keep you motivated and keep you consistent. Now, I want to share with you a couple of different books that I have annotated. They have all been annotated in a completely different style, and I'm going to explain why. This is a traveling book. I read a copy from the library and then ended up buying one for myself. So far, my sister has annotated it, and she wants to lend it to one of her friends, who I'm also going to encourage to annotate if she would like. And I'm just going to try to get as many people as I can to read it, and then I'll go through and do a final annotation. This book is literally falling apart because I went way too hard on it. I did not follow my own advice, and I annotated it on a first read through. However, this book series, Bodazushi, has been made into a TV show called The Untamed, which I had already watched, and while there are differences, the overall story is very similar and the themes are almost the same. There are 4 other books in the series, which once I finished annotating this, I read all of those, and I do plan to continue annotating them as well. This is the first book that I ever annotated for school. I have already mentioned it multiple times throughout this video, and in the past I'm sure as well. It's one of my favourite books ever. It is such an incredible read. It's only small, but you can see how much I've written in this. I'd suggest it to everyone, but especially if you like sci-fi and unreliable narrators, this is the book for you. Also, I have annotated this twice, and the style of annotation is completely different, so if you read it, you can clearly see which one was done by teenage me, which one was done by 25-year-old me, and it is really interesting to see the differences in what I picked up back then versus now. And this is the book that I'm currently annotating. It is a poetry book, and also I wanted to show you a poetry book that I partially annotated. As you can see, the style of annotation you go for can change a lot depending on what you're looking for and what the purpose of your research is. It's really up to you to practice annotating to find out what works best for you at any given time. And like I said, I know a lot of people find it scary because they don't want to mark up their books, which is totally fine. I have a couple of books myself that I will never touch a pen to, but I also think that annotation is sort of like an expression of love for the text. You are pooling your own thoughts onto the page next to the very phrase that caused those thoughts to form. And this brings us to the end of Analysis 101 Part 3. I feel like this video is a lot more dense than the others, but I don't really trust myself to make that judgment right now because my brain is not working at full capacity. I hope that this was helpful, and I hope that you enjoyed the newish editing style that I've tried here. And above all, I really hope that this was worth the wait. I'm very, very excited to get this out to you. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope that I'll see you all again soon. Bye!